Hello and welcome to Patricia C. Wrede Rainbow, a podcast where we reread the Enchanted Forest Chronicles and yell about them. Okay, so there's just a lot of head shaking happening. You guys don't love it?
I didn't shake my head.
I shook my head.
Shelby did enough of it for both of you.
But to be fair, that's how I normally react to Amy's puns, so.
Yeah.
Aw, thanks. So, you may be familiar with this podcast as Tortall Recall, the name of our regular podcast, but this is a Patreon rewards episode. We hit one of our goals on Patreon. The reward was we would make a bonus episode about a book suggested by our patrons, and Enchanted Forest Chronicles was chosen. So, that's what we're doing. It's a different podcast now, and I'm the host because I actually read these ones. So we only read Dealing with Dragons. If you haven't read it, we're only going to be talking about the first book. We'll have a spoiler section, so you can skip it if you want to read the different ones. But if you want to read that book and get back to us, you might have a little more fun listening to this. Dealing with Dragons was the first book. It was published as a novel in 1990, but based on a short story that was published in 1987 by Patricia C. Wrede. I'm Amy. I'll be the host. My pronouns are she, her, and we're going to be introducing ourselves with our favorite chapter titles from the book Dealing with Dragons. Mine is Chapter 4, in which Kazul has a dinner party and Cimmerian makes dessert.
Solid choice. My name is Shelby, and my pronouns are she, her, and my favorite is chapter title number 6, in which the wizards do some snooping and Cimmerian snoops back.
Oh, it's a very good one. My name is Gus, and my pronouns are they, them, and I am actually going to do chapter 5, in which Cimmerian receives a formal call from her companions in dire captivity.
Yeah, that was my second choice.
Yeah, so we just picked 3 chapters in a row.
Yeah, they're good chapters.
The chapter titles are so good. I love these books, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So now that we've all introduced ourselves, let's move on to First Adventure, or the Historia Draconum. So, when did you first read this book?
Oh, goodness. I think there were maybe dinosaurs outside? This is legitimately one of the first books I remember, like, truly loving as a kid. My brother and I both had a copy. We shared a copy that was, like, a bind-up edition of all 4 that was hardcover and utterly destroyed by the time I was in, like, 4th or 5th grade. Like, pages falling out, like, broken in half, like, just read it so many times.
Mm-hmm.
That year for Christmas, whenever that was, my parents actually gave each of us a separate set of them because the state of this book had become so dire. The copy that I now have, I had like a little box set. Have always loved this book.
Yeah.
It's a quality book.
I read this book for the first time as an audiobook. When I was 6 years old on a road trip with my family. My mom picked it up from the library. It was on cassette tape, and we listened to it in the car. And I don't have many memories from, like, being 6 years old. It's not like, not much is going on when you're 6 years old. But I can remember listening to the absolutely ridiculous dragon voices, and also ridiculous princess voices, honestly.
I mean, there aren't many voices in that audiobook that aren't ridiculous.
They're all completely absurd. It's great. If you haven't listened to the audiobook, you should give it a listen. It's fun.
Or maybe not. Gus and I may have some differing opinions.
We have polarized opinions. I find it charming.
Fight.
Anyways, I also reread this for this as an audiobook. Because I own it as an audiobook because I listen to it at work sometimes, like every 2 years or so.
I didn't know that!
Yeah, I didn't buy it special for this or anything.
Nice.
Oh, I love that. So, I have a very vivid memory of the first time that I read this book because it was a book that I was supposed to read for my birthday. I was turning 10 years old, and that year was going to be the first time that I was ever on a plane, but that was going to be on my birthday exactly. So my mom brought me to Borders and had me pick out a book and said, "This is going to be your plane book. Don't read it before you get on the plane." I sure did read it before we got on the plane. And my mom was like, "Well, what are you going to read by the plane?" And I basically said, in the meekest, most 10-year-old way possible, "Sounds like we have to go back to Borders now." And then I bought the other 3 books, all of which I also read before we got on the plane.
Oh, man. No, okay, I have to, give more of my background now in response to your two, because there were 2 other things about my background with this book. The first of all being the other books in this series. When I was a kid, I reread the series all the time. That's the issues with our book. But I had a very distinct reading order, which was utterly ridiculous.
Ooh.
Because when I was a kid, it should be noted, this does not hold true even a little bit now. When I was a kid, my favorite book was the 4th book. I think I liked that it's a little, I don't remember, is it actually first person or is it just closer? I feel like it's a little closer.
It's first person.
Okay, it's first person. I think I liked that, and I liked that the character was pretty young. And so I would always read the 4th book first. And then I would be like, well, I'm starting from the back, so I guess I have to do 3 next. So then I'd read book 3. Book 3, for those of you who don't know, has a massive cliffhanger. So then I'd go back, and then I'd read 2, and then I'd read 1.
This is the best reading order.
And I did this, every time I read the series.
That's like a locker combination.
Oh my god.
Yeah. And then, because of Gus, I should give my history with the audiobook, too, which is that I listened to the book for the first time last December, and I was driving home for Christmas break with my dog, and so it was an 11-hour drive that I was doing over 2 days, and I got on the road the second day, I think it was, and this audiobook was only one of the very few things I had to listen to, and it's totally perfectly safe, because I love this book from the bottom of my heart, I know that, but I never listened to the audiobook. I love the voices.
Look, I have nostalgia.
Possibly some of the most irritating voices in a audio production I have ever encountered. Most notably Cimarine, who can't seem to say a single sentence without emphasizing every phrase.
If every phrase is emphasized, aren't all of them the same? That defeats the point of emphasis.
Yeah, it does.
Look, I will absolutely acknowledge that my feelings about this audiobook are 100% nostalgia. Just all nostalgia.
Alright, so now it's time for first test. Or, translated the de Montmorency.
The what?
He was the author.
Oh, right!
He's the one with the super opaque language.
Yeah, so we're translating the de Montmorency, which is to say we're taking a complicated plot and distilling it into, I'm a good host.
You are! This is great!
Okay, so my summary for this book is, a girl disappoints her parents and also society, but it all works out anyway.
It's extremely good.
Yeah, so a slightly wider expansion of this summary is, a princess who isn't quite down with the way that society expects princesses to act decides to go work for some dragons. The dragons have their own thing going on and a totally different society and political system. So on the way, she meets a lot of cool role models and also stops wizards from destroying the dragon monarchy.
Yep.
Anything to add? Any thoughts? Anything I might have glossed over there?
She makes some friends who aren't, role models. Not that they wouldn't be good role models, but they're her peers.
Yeah.
This is maybe the shortest book summary that we've ever had, guys.
That's partially because this book has, an actual well-done plot that makes sense. You can summarize.
It's a very...
I know it's kind of jarring.
It's a very compact plot, and any padding in this book is it's not oh, there's a side quest. It's Cimarine, has to get some hen's teeth and also, complains about some knights. It's great, and it's fun, and it's just, related to the rest of the plot that's happening, you know?
Yeah.
One thing that I really love about these books is that it feels like every sentence is world building. Even just like throwaway jokes and lines are really good. Like, for example, in the Kingdom of Linderwall, the number 5 is fashionable. And like, that just says a whole lot because it's a kingdom that cares about what's fashionable, but also chooses totally arbitrary things to be fashion.
It's so good.
And
Uh-huh.
that's the first sentence. I do want to say one thing about the structure of the text before we move on to world building. In the text itself, there's a point where Zeminar the wizard is melting and his text gets smaller and
Yes.
as he melts. And I'm sort of a sucker for that. Like, I love anything that plays with the medium and like uses the things that you can do with the medium, even if it's just the font getting smaller to denote that someone is melting.
I'm so glad that you told me this.
You didn't? Oh, right, because the audiobook.
Please tell me anything
Oh.
else that's like, I don't think there is anything else, but if there were.
There isn't. There might be something in future books. Did the audiobook do anything that kind of really used the medium, or?
Oof, wow. No, I would say not really, but there was definitely one line, this isn't necessarily a thing that I liked. I have read the paper versions, and I don't think that this is something that was indicated in the text. There's a line where the king, Cimorine's father, is talking about her arranged marriage to, what's
Thranduil?
Thranduil, yes. And he's like, I didn't think you'd care about the size of his, pause, kingdom. And it was like, what?
No!
It was
No!
terrible. It was the worst thing I've ever had to listen to.
What? What?
It was,
That's her dad!
yeah! I don't know who was editing this and who was like, you know what? We're gonna use the take where it's an innuendo.
No!
So that was not fun for me personally.
Oh my gosh. I mean, there is a later innuendo that is the reason why I think Alienora is straight in the text.
Yes, it's a good innuendo.
Yeah, that one.
Or she, not necessarily straight, but definitely aloe, you know? We'll talk about it later, but
Our later
sorry.
section about innuendos.
yeah. Okay, I'm never gonna get over that. Who made that decision?
Multiple people had to think that this was a good idea. The voice actor, the director, whoever was actually actively cutting the lines together.
Now that my world has been turned upside down by choices made in the audiobook, let's move on to Run the Dominion Jewel, or Run the Collins Stone, which is also a jewel in these books. It takes it further away from the pun, but now it's its own thing. So, Run the Collins Stone is a segment where we talk about world building and magic and other stuff. So, like I said earlier, this book is like 100% world building, and it's all just in a world where fairy tales are real, but everyone kind of is so used to them that they forget that they don't have to do them. And I love it.
They forget that they don't have to do them. Arguably, I think they actually do have to do them, which is what's especially interesting.
Cimorine doesn't have to do them. There are prophecies that wind up getting fulfilled, but like, you don't have to follow your role.
You don't have to follow your role, but you do have to follow the rules. One of the things that I love about Cimorine is that she's very genre savvy, and she knows exactly what she needs to follow the rules and how to turn them to her advantage. So she'll definitely say, like, oh, I can't go do that because I'm not the right character. I have this in my notes as, like, weaponized genre savvy, but, like, I love how, when Thranduil gets his wish from the genie, and his wish is to fight a dragon and defeat him, and then Cimorine's like, okay, cool, can't fight Kazul now. You just gotta find another one. Gotta be male. She, like, always knows how to turn the fairy tale rules to work.
Yes, but another thing that I love about it though is like in cases like Alienora, where nothing really was supposed to happen to her, and people kept trying to make things happen to her anyway so that she could like be a princess who had a path in life to follow. Like, it didn't occur to anyone that she didn't have to do that. It didn't occur to anyone, maybe let's not send her to the dragons to get kidnapped. Maybe she can just live a regular person life. And she easily could have. Like, it would have been different from the way that society really expects their princesses to be treated. But it also would have been fine.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely like a major theme that I'm sure we'll come back to throughout this podcast because it shows up throughout the entire book, which is just this idea of like rigidity of expectations and rigidity of like social rules, and how like it's not that social rules are bad. It's not that like these paths in life are bad. It's like this rigidity, this lack of open-mindedness that like keeps getting people in trouble.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because like there's this whole thing about how like being a dragon's princess is totally respectable, but not being in mortal terror, no, absolutely not. And there's a point where Cimmerine's talking about like how she knows how the perfect volume that she's allowed to yell if there's an ogre, but she can't yell louder than that. And it's just like very much a parallel for society.
One of the things I think this book does really well that makes it feel like a little more real and like also just delightful is that like for every, like, fairy tale trope that exists, there is kind of a discount version in this book, right? It's like, you know, if it assumes that our fairy tales are, like, that top 5% of quality, draws from another 95%. So, yeah, you have that. Doesn't work. I think in later books, there's, like, one half of a pair of 7 League boots, like, it's everything doesn't work quite as well. And like, if you were going to be in a world where fairy tale tropes are real, of course they wouldn't always work, because nothing works all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's so fun. It's such a fun little piece of it makes it good to read, you know?
Mm-hmm. It's also just really great to kind of see people complaining about the things in fairy tales that are supposed to be good.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of like pushing against the whole idea of like happy ever after, or the thing that works for one person will work for everyone. For example, roses and diamonds falling out of someone's mouth probably only works for one kind of person.
I think also that that specific thing where it's like specifically pointing at fairy tales that most people are familiar with, or most of the readers are going to be familiar with, and pointing out like all of the things about them where it's like, this isn't very practical. It's a way of like kind of like you as the reader go, yeah, I always thought that wasn't very practical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, and also I think it's an example of meta text that's one of the first examples of meta text that many children encounter, right? Because like I love everything meta. I always have. Like, my favorite books are almost always meta books. And this is honestly probably the first one I ever read. Because the problem with meta text is that you need to have read the first thing to get the joke in the second thing. And as a kid, you just don't have that built-up library of tropes that you can encounter and see discussed as easily, except for fairy tale tropes, because we're fed those from such a young age. So this book opens up that idea of a meta text for the youngest audience that could appreciate it. And I love that.
It's so good.
Yeah, I was actually super big into fairy tale retellings for that exact reason, I think.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I sort of liked being able to look at familiar things in a new way. And
Yeah.
this was the only place that did that, really. I feel like we should talk about the dragons, right? Because they have their own political system in there.
True.
And it's completely different from the one that Cimmerian is used to.
My entire thought is it doesn't have any sort of conclusion. It's just like their political system is a monarchy, but it's not based on lineage. It's based on this magic rock that tells them who the best possible ruler could be. So it's like a bit like divine right in that you have this like entity that's saying this is the one, but also it's a real thing because divine right isn't real.
Right, no, and I feel like this is actually a not totally uncommon thing in fantasy, because it is often kind of a major conceit of romantic fantasy and other fantasies that there is some sort of literal magical divine right to rule, and that's why we can ignore the problems with monarchy for the sake of our fun book. And this is one of the especially mechanized versions of that, but I do think that's not an uncommon way of handling it. Which, like, I think that's fine.
Right.
Mostly, I don't think while our world has many problems, I don't think our world, or at least, like, modern America, has a huge problem with thinking that a monarchy is a good political system. So I think glossing over the issues with it in order to have our fun story about, like, knights and dragons, like, I'm cool with that. I'm cool.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I just, like, want to add in there, though, is within dragon culture, it exists outside of this rigid society with its rigid rules, but a lot of dragons are also shown to adhere to their own rigid rules that also intersect with the society. And even Kazul, the dragon who breaks these norms the most, is hinted to have had a previous princess. Like, so did she kidnap someone? Like, did Kazul also participate in this system before? Because, like, there's a lot of stuff that Cimarine inherited from the previous princess, and, like, she talks about how the previous princess didn't really keep things tidy, but other than that, it's never noted.
Mm-hmm. I think the previous princess, well, she, like, had run away moderately recently.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. I mean, it's also, like, a somewhat quirky thing, because we do know that this system is, like, kind of ingrained in both the human and the dragon societies. And so, like, I mean, once again, like, not condoning kidnapping, but I think part of the reason, like, that it doesn't read as, like, a problem for the morality of Kazul, in the text is just, like, well, this is just a thing you do. Like, they arrange for the princess to be somewhere where she might be conveniently carried off, and then the dragon comes and conveniently carries her off, and then she gets a better husband.
Mm-hmm. And it's like an exchange, and it's like just like a thing that is built into the social system, and it, like, more or less tends to benefit most people involved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just, I'm interested in the idea that Kazul was actively participating in the system until she had a chance to, like, reap the benefits without participating.
Well, and I think that is an example of why Kazul falls on the kind of good side in the narrative, is that the problem, as I said earlier, like, the problem is not with necessarily having social conventions, having these social structures. It's the rigidity that Patricia C. Wrede seems to be pushing back at over and over again in the text. And so the idea of someone who's like, well, yeah, like, right now, like, it is convenient and useful for me, and potentially useful for this princess, to have a princess as a dragon. But if at a later point it is more convenient for me to have a volunteer princess or to not have a princess, I'll do that thing. I'm not wedded to this one social concept of how I should exist. But rather I say, this is the most practical thing for me right now. Whether that's having a princess or not having a princess, and having a chief cook and librarian, great. I do find the idea of, like, what are the social conventions of dragons interesting, because you're right, like, we get this idea that the problem with Linderwall is that it's so normal and so tied to its expectations of how the world works. But we do see that, like, dragons have those, and they often aren't pushed back on as hard with the dragons. That, like, Kazul often is somewhat posturing for status in the narrative. For example, when they have the dinner party, and it's a way for her to show up Warog and say, nope, my princess is still here, and therefore I am a dragon.
Okay, before we move on from that, I just want to really quickly say my favorite metaphor in the whole book is, like, having a princess is like buying a bowl of fancy imported pears.
Yeah. It's good, and, like, it shows your status. But you could just as well have the crystallized sugar things.
And Serene is, like, a little offended.
Yeah. Yeah, because also I buy fancy fruit when I want to impress people. It's so good, and I loved it then, and I love it now. Like, there are modes of, for example, like, coronation gifts, like, Cimmerie's like, oh, you're very sick. Maybe we shouldn't be focusing on a coronation gift. Also, what if you become king? And everyone's like, no, you just bring a coronation gift anyway. And also, if you're very sick, you still have to do it. And that doesn't seem like a great idea, but that's not pushed against except by Cimmerine questioning it.
Except I don't actually think that's that big of a problem.
I don't think it's a problem, but I'm just interested in the contrast.
Yeah, but I think it is very much part of this idea that, I go back to that. It's not that social rules are a problem. They are useful. And when they are useful, you should use them. When you need to start off on a good foot with your king, or you need to, show all your friends that your princess is still here, you should go ahead and do it. Like, we're not talking about, like, a hipster mentality of, like, if this is a social convention, it is bad. Because that is in and of itself a form of rigidity, right?
And also, now that I've said it, like, it's not Cimmerine's place to critique someone else's, like, social rules, Like, she is involved with the dragons now, but that's not... she's not actually a member of that culture. Like, she participates in it, but she's not actually a part of it, so... it makes sense, really.
Mm-hmm. And I think that is in some ways shown in her, like, being like, Kazul, like, you totally can't go to this thing, and Kazul's like, no, actually, this is, like, the most important thing for me to go to, because it's, like, literally us picking the king, then what does Kazul do? She goes and becomes king. So, like, in that case, Kazul was proven pretty right.
She always is. I think that we should move on to Social Justice Corner. How are we feeling about that?
I love a good social justice corner. It's my favorite corner to be in.
That's pretty good.
Should we maybe start our Social Justice Corner with, while you were busy being heterosexual, I was studying the Wrede, which is how I thought her name was pronounced, but it's not.
Studying what?
The Wrede. But
it's
Wrede.
Wrede, yeah.
Oh.
I could just... while you were busy being heterosexual, I was studying various things that I forced my tutors to teach me in secrecy, not telling my parents.
That's a good...
I like that.
Yes.
A little long, but I think it works anyway.
Yeah.
So, the first thing that I want to say, I'm hoping I can get out of my system quickly, and it's that Princess Cimmerine, and also almost everyone in this book, is an aromantic asexual icon.
Seems fair.
It's true and real. And my evidence for that is partially just that not only does she think, oh, these princes are coming to rescue me specifically, I'll send them to a different princess and that will solve the problem, but everyone really agrees with her on that. And that's part of why I think she's an aromantic asexual icon, and so are all of her friends, except Princess Alienora, who is allosexual. That's the end. Yeah, that's my whole thesis.
It's a good thesis.
Thank you. Does anyone else have queer things to bring to the table?
Well, in gendery things, dragons choose their sex at puberty, it appears.
Mm-hmm.
Which is very interesting, and not explored very much beyond one sentence in one
It's a throwaway line. Why not?
But it leads me to so many questions. Among them, do dragons have gender roles? At all? It is unclear to me. We don't see any.
Did dragons just get the concept of, like, and the words for king and queen from humans, and they were like, these are, like, important roles that humans have. Let's make this office be king and this office be queen. And then just, like, that, it stops there.
I like the idea that humans got it from dragons and then imposed their ideas of femininity versus masculinity on the titles without really knowing anything about dragons or their gender.
It appears they don't have gender roles, although they do choose their sex. The other part there is, while they don't seem to have any gender roles in dragon society, human gender roles seem to be very important to them in how they think about human. So they have, like, internal human gender roles for humans. Notably, there's a point that was, like, very frustrating when they go to the dragons, to say, like, hey, these wizards are trying to, like, throw your king thing. And the dragons is like, oh, they're princesses. Of course they're just making up hysterical, like I'm not sure they actually use the word hysterical, but it's very much those hysterical women are making stuff up.
Mm-hmm.
And so like that's fascinating to me because like is that like dragons having an internalized misogyny against human women, or is this just like they don't even really have a concept of gender, but they have a concept of princesses, which is still a box that they put people in, and they have like definitely have like acquired some of the biases against women and princesses from humans and use them against that box of people.
So, one thing that I actually was thinking about in regards to Talking to Dragons, or no, not Talking to Dragons, Searching for Dragons? Yes, Searching for Dragons, the sequel, is that that's the sort of the first time where people talk about princesses in terms of being girls or women and talk about princes in terms of like being men and boys. Like before that, it's sort of like it's just princesses are princesses, and obviously that is a heavily gender coded title, but for dragons maybe it's not.
Right, yeah, no, it's exactly that. It's like we don't actually know whether dragons treat human women who are not princesses the way they treat princesses, because we don't see that. They don't really have any interaction with human women who aren't princesses, and so like they aren't making decisions based on gender, they are making decisions based on your existence as a princess.
Right. Dragons do seem to really respect Morwen, but we haven't seen a lot of dragons interacting with Morwen. I think it's mostly Kazul and like the mention of Morwen from elsewhere.
Yeah, no, I think it's the escort dragons like recognize her, but we don't they don't really we don't get much of an idea of what they know about her.
Right. But I think that like yes, princesses in this book are like heavily coded as like sort of silly women. Like silly is always the word used to describe them. And I do appreciate that for Cimmerian. It's very much like you're silly, but that's who you are, and that's fine. And like you're still like a person who's nice enough. But it's also still very much falling in these stereotypes and sort of like saying that frivolity is the worst thing that you can have.
Okay, actually, so let's say we're moving on. Can I give my background of reading this book recently? Which is that like a few years ago, I read a Tumblr post that just came across my dash from somebody who said something about, somebody asked them about the Enchanted Forest Chronicles, and they said, oh, I reread those recently, and I was really disappointed, and I don't like them anymore because I think they're pretty misogynistic. And I was like, that's weird, and I only kind of skimmed this post because I didn't want it to ruin a book that I loved in childhood. And then I never saw the post again, haven't been able to find it again, but I have reread the books, and I cannot figure out where they're coming from. I have tried. I have looked for it. And as much as I hear what you're saying, Amy, and that is the best guess I can have of what they were thinking, is that they were thinking, you know, there are all of these women princesses who are very frivolous and not great. I don't think that's a problem. I don't think that's a feminist problem. And I think that's because, for one, we see Cimmerian, who is not any of those things, and is not coded as masculine. Like, it's not a matter of, like, she is less feminine and therefore better. Maybe that she's less frivolous and therefore better, but even Eleonora, who's not as like, clever or, you know,
down to earth,
Cimmerian, she's still very much portrayed as a great character. The characters who are not are the characters who can't get over their rigid ideas of how the world should work and can't move past that when they're in a situation where those ideas don't work. And actually, I would argue that if anything, those are almost characters who are examples of toxic femininity, which is not a thing that ever gets talked about as much as toxic masculinity. I think if it exists in the form of these princesses. Like, there is a princess who, whenever anything goes wrong and she can't get her way, she just bursts into tears. Which is, like, really the opposite of the, like, toxic masculinity, like, can't express your emotions.
That's, I see, that's the sort of thing that I, see discussed in conversations about race and how white women react to criticisms of racism, is what I would tie that to.
Yeah. So I would say that, and then, like, the kind of mean girl side of it with Karen Dwell. The kind of classic, like, girl who weaponizes social standing in a way that is extremely unkind to anyone who has less social standing than her, which in this situation is very much coded as specifically class and money.
Mm-hmm.
She is the one with the golden crown. And so
With diamonds.
yeah, golden crown with diamonds mistreats the people with silver and I forget what metal Alinora's crown is.
Hers is pearl, and her hair is the color of ripe apricots.
Right.
I've read these books a lot of times.
But yeah, so I was actually in some ways surprised, but I still do. I think that actually the gender politics in this holds up pretty well.
Oh, I definitely agree with you. It's just that, like, when I think that this is something that we do have to discuss because it's there and it can be read out of it. Like, if you aren't, like, if you're reading at a certain level and if you go deeper, I do think that it breaks down. But I think that you can, like, I think that there are definitely ways that you, if you read this when you are very young, you get the wrong critique out of it and it becomes, I have to be a sensible person who works mostly in practicality. I also do want to point out that the opening of Talking to Dragons is very much, or not Talking to Dragons, Searching for Dragons is very much like Mendenbar being like, women are all trying to trick me into marrying them all the time, just using their women tricks. And I don't, like, love that, and obviously he gets better and unlearns it, but, like, it does make it maybe my least favorite book because I have to sit through him learning that, like, no, that's, like, just what has been taught and the way that, like, rigid societal rules are working. Please chill, my guy. Here's the thing, I don't agree with me that strongly, but I do think we have to talk about it.
Yeah, I think the only other point I'd make there is I think there is definitely an argument that could be had about what it means to critique frivolousness. First of all, I think there's two things. To what degree that is gendered is an interesting question, and to what degree that is inherently a bad idea is also. Like, I think there are parts of frivolousness that can be reasonably critiqued, especially when it comes to class contexts and other things. One of the things that's very noticeable is this frivolousness that you're talking about is associated as much with class as it is with gender. And one of the ways that I would note that is that Thorindel is actually also noted to be frivolous in a way that is not great over and over again, especially when she first meets him and he's, like, looking at all these swords and he's, like, very taken by just the pretty swords that, and Cimmerine's like, that has terrible balance, what are you doing? Like, so I'd argue that, like, both that to some degree lessens the gendering of it in this book in a way that is helpful to me. And so while I think you're right that people absolutely still can read it as a gendered thing, then that's true, but
it's a bad reading.
Always going to read the unfortunate things they have learned from society into things because they are in the people, not in the book.
Yeah.
Only so much a book can do to counter that.
I mean, if you're gonna bring up a bad Tumblr post, I'm gonna try to make sure that we knock down that bad Tumblr post, even though you don't remember what was in it. Here we go.
Yeah, I think we've done a solid job of trying to figure out what they were bothered by in this Tumblr post. I will never be able to find again what has bothered me since the day I read it.
Great. No,
the day you skimmed it, to be clear.
Yes, since the day I skimmed it.
Yeah. So, like, I did just say everything that I could possibly imagine being a gender problem everything that I could possibly imagine being a feminism problem in this, I guess.
Right. Well, and I would just like to go back and say, like, I do think you're also not wrong that, like, there are ways that critiques of frivolity are bad in that, like, it's not bad to like cool, fun things. I like a lot of the things in this book because they're ridiculous. I am all for fun frivolity at times, but that doesn't mean I don't like books that celebrate practicality, and I think there is, like, I am upset by the gendering of that, but not by it a critique of frivolity in itself, because I think it's, like many aspects, something that is bad in excess and good in its proper amount.
Yeah. I kind of love practicality. And I love that Cimarine is just an icon for practicality, and so is everyone she knows. Well, not everyone she knows, but all the people older than her who are living successful lives.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so how are we social justice?
We could bring up race very briefly.
Okay.
There is one character of color in this book. It is the Djinn.
Oh.
That is my note.
Yeah.
He's described as a dark-skinned giant in a turban and loincloth. That's my entire note.
Yep.
Not great.
Yeah.
In one of the sequels, the only character of color I've encountered so far is Roma, but is not called Roma, so...
My dog is sighing at the state of race in this book.
Yeah.
I want you to know that.
Not excellent.
Not excellent.
So... That's race.
That's race. I don't have much of a critique other than I don't think it's great.
Yeah. Gus and I talked about this like almost a little bit in that we brought up the concept with each other. Wizards are corporations. Discuss.
All right. So here's where I think you were going with this. Is that the plot of this of dealing with dragons is that the villain plot is that the wizards are trying to rig the election, and that this is the sort of thing that corporations are doing to modern day America. How'd I do?
You did pretty good, but I also wanted to talk about the ecological implications of what the wizards do.
I love it.
Yeah, so dragons are creatures that naturally generate magic, and the Enchanted Forest is a place that naturally generates magic. Wizards cannot generate their own magic, so they have to take magic from other sources. And there are ways that they are allowed to do that. There are certain places where they can go to do that, and there are regulations put on them to stop them from taking all of the magic and destroying the ecosystem. The wizards work on ways to get around those things. So, for example, there's a large plot in the second book that's about them taking magic directly from the Enchanted Forest when they are clearly not supposed to do that. The first book is about them trying to get more dragon magic and more power to take magic from other places. They show what happens when corporations go unregulated and the way that corporations fight against regulations at all times in order to increase their own gain, which is unsustainable for the larger community.
Great. Good theory.
I love it.
Thank you.
I have a related, I think the segue to my point about wizards is that corporations are people now?
Mm-hmm.
What? Maybe they're not anymore. Remember when that was a thing that was in the news, though? It was like corporations are people.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was a thing that I was barely politically aware during. But I'm going to talk about, are wizards human? The answer, if you're wondering, is no.
Are they the answer?
You know, it doesn't confirm either way. But, so, wizards, there's this quote here. I have it pulled up. 1 second. There's this point where Roxham is talking, and they're talking about who stole a book from a different dragon. They're like, if it wasn't a wizard, who was it? And Roxham says, could have been anybody. An elf, a dwarf, even a human. No reason to think it was a wizard. They're not humans. They're not humans.
I also find it interesting that, like, every wizard mentioned is, like, definitely at least coded male, definitely at least uses he, him pronouns.
Yeah.
But Zeminar does have a son. Like, Antarel is Zeminar's son. So, like, I'm just wondering if maybe wizards are, like, made or cloned or, like, created in a more constructive way. More, like, physically constructing them.
If they're their own species or whatever, and we never see any, like, female wizards or whatever. Mm-hmm. I think there are many, many, many possible answers because of various reasons. But I do think that the flip side of this is that witches are not just the female equivalent of wizards, because it is stated later in the book that witches are human.
Mm-hmm.
And Morwen specifically is a human.
So, wait, are wizards just any creature that cannot create its own magic? Because I think that
Possibly.
Morwen can,
Morwen
No,
doesn't
she-
create her own magic. Morwen uses other things to make magic, so she uses the ingredients in her spells
oh, right,
and
yes.
such. That's like the distinction between like you have like dragon magic, which is innate. Witch magic is created from and like objects, and
Magician magic is,
magician
Gorgeous.
magic is just overly academic. I don't know.
yeah.
And wizard magic is stolen.
Okay.
Yeah. But, so I don't know if wizard is like a sort of a job title, in that if it's, just like the way that they get their magic, or if it's just like, you know what? This is like one of the few times where we're actually seeing a fantasy setting where they're just going with the Tolkien model of wizards, which is wizards are just like their own weird species that's like kind of very powerful and weird and mysterious, but also in this case not actually very powerful from their own like selves. But like they're their own species. They're not human.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. Like, I definitely think you're right. What is up with wizards?
They're bad. They're bad. They're all bad, and they all love to just like gaslight everyone all the time. And like they really like being like, you know what? Let's put people in situations and then tell them that like we didn't do that to them and they got themselves. I'm sorry. I'm really pissed off about that time that Seminar like made the cliff disappear, and Cimmerian was like, "What is this?" And he's like, "Oh, do you need some help? Then you'll be in my debt." And Cimmerian's like, I think I got this, thank you very much. Did you do this?" And he's like, "How would you possibly? How could you know?" Anyways, and then she handles it and she's great. I hate the wizards a lot.
Yeah, they're bad. They're bad and I don't like them, and they're corporations, but they're also individuals, and those individuals are terrible people.
Okay.
With that said, let's move on to reading between the lines, which is zombie author / piercing the veil. So, these books, as I mentioned earlier, these books were not published in the order that they are chronologically supposed to be read according to the either the publisher or the author.
Both, I think.
Yeah. So Dealing with Dragons is actually the second book written, and Talking to Dragons was written first. Talking to Dragons is it spoilers to talk about the plot of Talking to Dragons?
I think we don't want to give them the full plot, but I think we can say that Talking to Dragons
The premise.
is about basically a next-gen character
Yes.
following what I already mentioned to be a big cliffhanger in the book. It's a first-person narrative. It's also a narrative from a character who, for spoiler reasons, doesn't know much about the world, and is therefore learning everything for the first time, and it's a very different entry point.
Yeah, I actually, when I read through these books the first time, I found it very frustrating that the main character of these books didn't know everything when I knew everything. And I think that maybe it should still be, like, I don't think that I would love this series as much if Cimmerian hadn't been my jumping on point, because she is very important to me. But I would definitely enjoy Talking to Dragons much more if it were the first book that I'd read in this series and I got to learn all the things as everyone else did.
I already explained that I really loved the fourth book as a kid. The reasons, like, I cannot entirely replicate now, except that I do think, in some ways, the fourth book is, like, the most fast-paced, the most straight adventure, because it is, in some ways, as it is conceived now, the climax of the entire series. That it's when everything comes to fruition, and all of the characters show up at the end, and, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I just read it, and the whole time I was like, where's my best friend Cimmerian? Where's my best friend Kazul? Why isn't Morwen here the whole time? What is going on?
Yeah.
Like, I think maybe I just really liked the practical characters a lot.
Yeah.
And also, I found the lizard very annoying. There's a lizard in
There's
this
a
book.
Yeah, also, the other thing that is interesting about the fourth book that distinguishes it from the first three is that the fourth book is the only one that's set entirely in the Enchanted Forest.
Oh, right.
For a series called The Enchanted Forest Chronicles, you may have noticed we didn't spend much time in the Enchanted Forest in this book.
It was like mentioned one time or something.
We
Yeah.
went to visit Morwen.
Yeah, true.
The trees were very big.
But the fourth book actually takes place entirely in the Enchanted Forest, and it's much more focused on, like, that as the magical world, whereas in the first three books, you kind of much more focused on the fact that the entire world is a fairy tale world. The Enchanted Forest is just kind of the most extreme form.
Let's move on to Queen's Riders, or the Right Honorable Wicked Stepmother's Traveling, Drinking, and Debating Society and Evil Uncle's Auxiliary. A section where we talk about friendship, human and animal. Let's talk about some friendship moments, friends.
All of them?
Uh-huh. They're all so good. I love that Cimmerian just, like, gets to have a friend her age, but also a friend who is a literal dragon, and also a friend who's a very old man dragon.
Roxham is great.
Mm-hmm.
Great character.
I love that she's like, oh yeah, Roxham reminds me of my great uncle, who's a human being, and like, who's like a little hard of hearing. I love Roxham. He's just a grandpa.
And for Kazul and Cimmerian's friendship, I just have written down the, like, peak moment of friendship there, which is, like, after Kazul has become king of the dragons, and Cimmerian is just like, I don't need me anymore. What am I gonna do? And everybody's like, are you crazy? And of course Kazul still needs you. Just another title.
It's so good. I also really love Kazul and Morwen's friendship.
Yeah.
Because they just bond over how much everyone else is just like not as practical as they are and not as interested in like knowing as much as possible about the world and how to like go about in it.
Which is also Morwen and Cimmerian's friendship. Like, one of my favorite things about that friendship is it's just like that pure moment of like that first time you met a friend who just thought the same way you did. I know who that friend was for me, and like I have other very good friends from that time period, but that first time you kind of were like, oh, you just get how I think. Like, have to explain it. It's just like a crazy moment. And captured that very well.
Yeah, like one thing that I really, really love about Cimmerian, Kazul, and Morwen is that they're all perfectly in agreement when Cimmerian is like, these suitors keep showing up and it is ruining my productivity. And everyone's just like, it does sound like that would ruin your productivity.
Right.
Like,
and then all of their responses are not like, well, we should explain to them and maybe they'll go away, or like, you know, maybe we should think about what we're doing. It's like, okay, like, what's the most practical way to just make this stop? Like, let's put up a road sign, like, and a lie around, like, it's all cool, like, this'll make it work.
It's all so good. Yeah, I just love that, like, trifecta of three very different people who approach the world in the same way.
Yes. And then, on the totally other side, I love Cimmerian and Alienor, who, like,
They're so good.
love each other, even very different. They both have, like, somewhat similar values, even though their personalities and their methods for going about things are completely different, and so, like, it's cool.
And then there's, like, the Stone Prince who just shows up and Cimmerian leaves him in a room overnight by accident.
And he's, like, totally okay with it, basically.
He's like, it's okay that you didn't leave me a
It's
candle.
fine, if I had had a candle, they would have seen me.
Also, there's a point where Antarel is threatening the Stone Prince, and he just, instead of saying anything to him, he just turns to Cimmerian and is like, should I be taking him seriously? I love it so much because he just immediately is like aware of what Cimerine's role in this friendship is.
Also, Alienor and Cimarine, the moment when Alienor first encounters Cimarine pretending to be like a clueless princess, and Alienor is just like having a hard time not laughing because like that's not Cimarine. Also great.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And like also Alienora doesn't quite know what's going on as much as Cimarine does, but she is always just down to jump in on it.
Right? Like,
And-
she would never think to come up with a fireproofing spell or figure out how to make it work, but, like, she'll do it with you. Like, why not?
Right, she's here to help out.
Yeah. She'll throw some soapy water on some wizards.
Yeah, like, she's just like, she loves her friend. Why doesn't Alienora ever come back?
It's a good question.
It's a really good question.
Yeah. Also, like, I want to find out what happens to the Stone Prince because I do want him to still be made of stone, but just have, like, stone outfits also.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I love the friends in this book so much. Like, it's all just such positive friendships, and Cimarine even, like, it talks about her talking to the other princesses sometimes, and she always says, like, they're very nice, or they're very silly, or, like, whatever, but there's still, like, these relationships that the princesses can have with each other in there, and then, like, you see the way that all the dragons really respect Kazul. Like, it just feels like this is a book where people have communities already, and it's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, not enough animal friends in this one.
True.
Yeah.
I don't think we should spend too much time talking about other books because that's not fair. But for those of you out there who don't know, there are good animal friends in the third book. So if
Oh,
third book, you get to the good animal friends.
there are some real good animal friends in the third book, and there's also one, like, buck wild animal friend in the third book.
I forgot about that. I was like legitimately just thinking about the many animal friends, not
Yeah,
the one.
the plurality of friends. But I mean, there is, like, Kazul has animal friends via Morwyn's cats, and Morwyn has animal friends via Morwyn's cats.
Sit on Kazul. They curl up on Kazul, and Kazul's just like, I'm gonna get up now, and they all just go whoop! And they slide right off her, and then they stalk out of the house because they're very annoyed at her. They just wanted to be her friend, and she had stuff to do.
Mm-hmm.
A very good and realistic depiction of cats, honestly.
Mm-hmm. But other than that, there's really not that much animal friendship. There's, like, a bird that she kills and then gives her some transportation feathers, but...
Yeah. No, that's for later books. Do we want to move on to thing that we already did?
Yes. All right. Welcome to Night Vision, or the Caves of Fire and Night Vision, where we talk about spoilers for this book and later parts of the series. We're gonna first move some stuff up here that we said earlier because we accidentally did spoilers. You're about to hear 15 seconds of music. Just skip ahead until you hear it again. Let's go. Let's talk spoilers.
It gets better though, past the fourth book, in looking back at it now.
Yeah.
For one, she knows how to name characters things that aren't Daystar.
Daystar, a
Daystar,
literal
the
warrior
sun.
cat's name.
It is what
Oh
I
my
would have
God.
named the hero of this book when I was in 4th grade.
No, but
When I was at my height of loving that book, which may explain a lot.
But Shelby, say the name of the star that's out during the day. There's a star that's out during the day, and it has a name that we call it.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Oh god!
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
This is the worst thing.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Please don't tell me that was a pun all along.
Shelby, you know that I can't tell you that.
Well, with that
It
revelation...
absolutely was.
Yeah.
That was absolutely intentional. Holy I mean, dang.
I've been angry for Oh gosh, 14 years now.
Okay, this absolutely needs to go in the spoiler section.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's a pun I knew.
Yeah, to explain, in case you maybe did not get the pun is that the word sun both means the thing in the sky in the day, the star in the sky in the day, and also the book is about him being the son of Cimmerine and also his dad, whose name I don't remember.
Mendenbar,
King of the
Yeah.
Enchanted Forest.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And his fancy sword. Yeah. So, okay. Let's talk a little bit about these books. I actually have a fan theory that is also a spoiler for the end of the book, the first one. So in the beginning of the book, Cimmerine finds the dragons because a frog tells her to do it. And the frog can speak, and when she asks, he says, "Oh yeah, you pick some stuff up from Enchanted Princess." But at the end of the book, a dragon does turn into a toad. I think that the frog is a former dragon, and that's why the dragons all knew Cimmerine was coming.
Or why he knew exactly where to send her.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah, because I feel like a dragon and a frog might hang out, maybe, in this universe, but I don't know if they would have if he would have that kind of clout, in the community.
It's an interesting theory, except that I also think it's been established that dragons only become frogs / toads, whatever, when they've been very, very bad and not dragon-like. And I don't know that someone like that would then go and be helpful to a princess.
Well,
People change.
there's no, I mean, there is the fact that this frog did interfere and start talking to Cimmerine when Cimmerine was like, "I'd rather be eaten by a dragon," clearly did not mean it, and was like, "I'm going to take you literally. Here's where you can go. I'm disguising this as helpful advice, but really, it's where you can go to get eaten by a dragon." So,
Yeah.
maybe not the most helpful
Fair.
and well-intentioned.
Fair. Add on to the theory.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In my heart, that frog is a dragon, formerly. And he's doing better now. But, like, you don't turn back into a dragon by acting like a dragon. If that were true, I would be a dragon right now from the age of 8 onwards. All right, so now let's move on to the Chamber of the Ordeal, or the King's Crystal, where we rate the book for nostalgia, which I can do this time, animal friendship, and recommend it to someone. Can I go first? Because I can do it
Yes.
this time. All right, I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10 for nostalgia because I did cry several times just thinking about how important this book is to me. And you know what?
Fair.
It aged well. It aged really well. For animal friendship, I am going to give it like very low animal friendship because so little of it was animals. So that's like a 3 out of 10. I'm sorry. The cat friendship was really good, but it was like 4 pages tops. And for who I would recommend it to, I'm going to buy 1 million copies of these and just hand them out to people on the street and say, "Read Dealing with Dragons right now in front of me. Sit down, read it. Right now. Do it." But if I need to pick a specific person, I guess, like, no, it's everyone.
That's fair.
Okay, I can go next. On nostalgia, I think I would give it a 9 out of 10, which is not, like, it's not losing a point for anything that's its fault, I should note here. It's purely because I read it for the last time in December, which meant that I was at the point where I could basically, like, predict the next word in any given sentence at any given point. Which is, like, not the worst place for a book, but also it's not as fun as when you're reading it for the first time in a while. So yeah, 9 out of 10. Still amazing. Still surprised at how well it stood up, as Amy said. I always kind of go into rereading books from my childhood with a little bit of tenseness, just a little worry. This one didn't betray me too badly, so that's cool. And then animal friendship. Yeah, I'm with you, Amy. Just not enough. To be fair, this is a rating system not designed for this book. But, like, Yeah, 2 out of 10? I know it can do better, because it does later.
Mm-hmm. And who
Who would you recommend this to?
Yeah, all the peoples. But especially, I think for those kids who are just getting ready to have their first meta text books. Like, it's just so delightful for that age.
Yeah, let's see. For nostalgia, I mean, I think I gotta give this 10 out of 10. It's just a great reread. Like, there was stuff I picked up on this time that I, just kind of missed the other times. And that's partially just because I'm not a very good or observant reader or listener, but also it's just real fun. I have more context for things as I get older.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that's fun in these books. It doesn't take away from the nostalgia. It makes every reread fun. For animal friendship, I mean, it just feels unfair to rate this on animal friendship, in a way. That frog is kind of an animal frenemy.
Well, the frog could be a dragon.
And there's also an animal enemy. There's a frog enemy at the end. So, I mean, like, it's kind of like there's some cats, but also there's some not so nice animals.
Uh-huh.
I might just abstain from this one.
That seems fair.
Would you be more comfortable rating it for dragon friendship?
Oh.
100 out of 10.
Yeah.
I think I speak for us all. As for who I would recommend this to, I, of course, agree with both of you. I was thinking as I was listening to it this time, there's a couple kids who I know who are maybe like 8 or 9 who have been reading like the Rick Riordan books and stuff, and like who are just like really avid readers, and I was like, I need to make sure that these kids also read Dealing with Dragons.
Yep.
I need to make sure that they're doing it, because those are just, they're very like, they're not like similar books, but they have like similar sensibilities, I think.
Great. I mean, it's harder to think of someone who we wouldn't recommend this to, I think.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there's nobody.
Yeah.
A great book. All right, well, with our ratings done, let's move on to Palace Gossip and Listener Mail. I actually do not have any of the names of people who interacted with us on Twitter or Tumblr.
Oh, cool. I have all of those names. I think we're just going to go through all of them.
All right, so Gus, would you like to list some names?
I would like to list so many names. Okay, so these are all the people who interacted with us on Tumblr and Twitter. I think we're starting with Twitter from June 9th through July 27th, which is the day we're recording this. So that is Ziggy T. Schutz, Megan _D, Catherine NZR, Deidre Loves Jim, Control _Abandon, Writing Rissa, Marble Tross, Elise Lockwood 1, Lingthusiasm, Finnegan with 3 Fs, Dragon Babies Pod, Mary Thorns, Eileen Kramer, Indigo Han, It's the Bookcast, or maybe ITS the Bookcast, Mercurek, I am going to mangle this one, Miss Jobergs? I am very sorry. Magic _GPS, Shortened Patience, Mosslam, Naomi Giddings, Dorian Eyes, Holy Knuckled, Amber J7, Word Nerd Knitter, and Sally Greiter. Sally Greiter or Sally G. Writer? I don't know. On Tumblr, we have It's Balderdash, Astrid Flies, Nightet, Writing Rissa, Agent Kala Delia Stark, Kaditha Vangu, Dendritic-Trees, Queen of Daffodils, Forest of Stories, Aerophily, Petite Ursus, Matilda Bell, Stars and Atoms, Saga Shots, Celtic Teddy, Sophie A. Katz, Beloved Let's Rattle the Stars, and Ill-Tempered Dragons. Ooh, very good one.
And thematic.
Shout out to Ill-Tempered Dragons, I guess. I don't have a list of patrons
We have 21 patrons. These are the 13 that have commented on the post asking for what name you'd like to be shared. If you are not one of these 13 and you would like to be named as a patron on the show, please just find the tagged post on our Patreon and comment with the name you'd like us to use. Our patrons are Joe, Abigail D, Vague Dark Entity, Ethan, Lemons, Math, Emmy, Isabel, Catherine, Abigail L, Courtney, Sophie, and Michaela. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. And as we mentioned, this episode is something that our patrons voted on. So if you donate any amount to us, you can also have a say in similar potential bonus episodes. We aren't going to do them super frequently, but when we hit patron points, I think mostly.
As we hit our goals, we'll do bonus episodes, and there's also some bonus content up there at certain tiers. For example, bonus episodes, etc. Thank you so much for supporting the show if you're already donating. Thank you so much for supporting the show if you don't donate and are listening. Thanks so much.
Mm-hmm. I feel like we haven't said this enough or at all, which is just that I'd just like to say we have some pretty funny stuff up there. It's good content.
Yeah.
I laugh far more making Patreon bonus episodes than pretty much any other time in my life.
Oh, really?
That's charming. Yeah. I mean,
I love to have fun with my friends. Thank you. I'm so glad you enjoy them. Yeah. But, we're also never going to put any episodes that are, canon Tamara Pierce episodes up there, so don't worry if you can't donate.
It's just some fun bonus content, just some voices. You want to hear our voices more?
Cool. Yeah, so thank you so much, and this episode comes to you courtesy of our patrons. Anyway, yeah, do you want to maybe share some listener mail? I know that we maybe got some.
Yeah, I want to do this Griffin McElroy style, I think. This is an interaction from Indigo Han on Twitter in response to me complaining about how Antarell is the worst. Indigo Han says, "Soapy water with lemon in a water pistol." And then, plus, imagine the humiliation of taking out wizards with water balloons. Which I appreciated, specifically because of that point when Zeminar's like, "God, soap suds, this is humiliating. Just imagine." God. Anyways, thank you, Indigo Han. You gave me a very large laugh. It was good.
Alright, thank you so much, Indigo Han. And if we don't have any more listeners, maybe let's do our Ingenisaurus themed sign-off. See you, Cherry Juba listeners. I didn't say cherries, but it's okay. I was nervous.
It was very cute.
Thanks.